Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Ronsley, and you are catching a live recording of Should I Start a Podcast? If you want the edited version of this show, find it on all the podcasting platforms or your favorite podcast player. It's called Should I Start a Podcast? And it is for business owners who have a podcast and want to get clients, get more listeners, get more credibility. Today, I have a good friend of mine on the show, Leanne Hughes. We're going to talk about her journey as a podcaster, starting from scratch. It's a really cool story. And we're going to talk about a mistake that business owners make when they start a podcast is picking the wrong hosting platform. And we'll talk about that. But if you have a business and a podcast and have a case study on how the podcast has helped or hindered your business, DM me. I'd love to feature you on the show. I'd love to get your story. I'd love to hear about how you're doing it different if you are. And if you agree or disagree with anything that we say on the show, or you have a better way of doing things, just mention that in the comments, because I would love to hear a different way of doing stuff. Today, Leanne Hughes is an amazing businesswoman. She's a friend and has been part of We Are Podcast for a long time now. But the most amazing thing is to see her evolution as an entrepreneur, as a podcast host, as a community builder, and taking her strengths of bringing people together and about group dynamics and taking that into her work and creating this new sort of community of people who care about the same thing. So help me welcome Leanne to the show. Leanne, how are you? Thank you for being here. This is so cool.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ronsley. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I definitely owe you so much because of my podcasting journey and what's taken off as a result. So thanks for having me.
It's always, I always think about you, you and Steph Taylor and a few other people, but I think about you all every time I think that things are down. When things are down in business as an entrepreneur, kind of think of why am I doing this sort of thing, and I do think about you all and another person is Rowan. I think about them. I think about you a lot. So I love your story. I love how it all started, but I don't want to taint my version. So I'd love for you to give your version of what it looked like from the beginning, like before podcasting was even on your radar, and then how you got into it, and kind of like a summary of where it's at today.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. So podcasting was never on my radar, but I loved listening to podcasts, and I was working in a corporate job. So every single day I would get in the car, commute to work, and just listen to podcasts from Pat Flynn, people like Jordan Harbinger. And then I realized that Jordan was actually coming to Brisbane for your podcasting event. So I signed up because I was just super keen to hear him speak and connect with him. And little did I know that would just turn everything for the best. I remember Andrew Griffiths was emceeing your event, and he said, right, we've got a competition. You can win a copy of my book, but to do that, you need to enter the name of your podcast and pop it into the hat. And of course, I didn't have a podcast, but I thought, you gave me advice, Ronsley, and it was create a show about something you'd like to learn more about. At that moment in time, I was working internally, running a lot of workshops around the world, but I wasn't very confident at doing it. So I thought, look, I'm a first-time facilitator. I like that the alliteration of that. So I put it into the hat, and I said, if this gets picked out, I will start the show. And lo and behold, Andrew picks up, he grabs his hat, and I see my blue Post-it note, and I was like, crap, I've got 30 seconds to think of what the show is about, who it's for when I run up on stage. And then fast forward 3 months later, I launched the show. And it's a very niche show, but it really helped build an audience and gave me the confidence to leave my job 12 months later. So that's the origin story.
Oh, how cool. I love the story. I love the story on how you put in the reps, because I think that is probably the most important part of the story is you putting in the work. So let's talk about that. I mean, 3 months later, it's not normal for someone to have the inspiration and to follow through with the inspiration, especially in today's world where you can say, I'm starting a podcast, get all the likes, and then feel like it's a lot of work, and then go, you know what, I think it's too much work, let me stop it. What were your reps like to get it going?
Yeah, well, like everyone else, I was super nervous. I had no real personal brand. What I did have were a few key people, and really a podcast it's just conversations you record that you release at scale. And when I got back from a trip to Canada, I had this incident happen during a workshop where a guy just refused to participate. So I came back from that trip to Australia and I rang up a few facilitation friends and asked them, what would you have done? And as I was thinking about that format, I thought, hey, these chats are actually quite useful. So I actually started, I love that quote, start where you are, use what you can. So I basically brought on my first 3 guests were people that I really, I had a lot of trust with and confidence. And I just started, just sharing it out. Now, you talk about the reps. I was so rewarded from having conversations because I was learning from that. Like my skill was developing just as a result of these conversations. So it wasn't purely focused on building business or marketing or anything like that. It was quite a selfish reason. But I found that in service of myself, I was helping all these other people as a side benefit. So I remember the first email I got actually was from, I think after episode 4. I set up this podcast email, this special Gmail account. I never checked it because who was going to email me? Who was listening to the show? I checked it, and a lady in Canada actually emailed me and was just talking about how excited she was about the show. And I think that, after episode 4, just getting that one email just really spurred on some more momentum.
Yeah. It's always absolutely insane getting a listener sort of say, hey, I've listened to your show. I still love it so much. It is such a thrill. But you're talking about me giving you advice about becoming the learner. And I want to kind of just touch on that for a second, because I feel like people start a podcast because they want to be seen as the experts. And I've heard people say, oh, I do a solo show because I want to be seen as an expert. I want to put out my expertise. And of course, there's places for that. But in my opinion, I believe that a podcast is actually not a content tool as much as it is a business development tool. And especially when you're starting off, like getting the reps in, it allows you to do that while not having to deal with the imposter, right? And I think people started to use this imposter syndrome as this excuse of like doing dumb shit. And I wonder what your thoughts on the whole process is.
I love the process. I had a podcast about facilitation, so naturally I'm actually all drawn in by co-creation. Everything I do, anything in my business, I see it as a partnership, and I always do things in draft as opposed to having things that are final, because again, not that I'm resisting the urge to be an expert. One day I'll step into the light, but I'm very comfortable in rallying people's thoughts, seeing what the best is out of this, and then creating more insight and impact. And you're right, Ronsley, like a lot of my previous guests on the show, I've actually ended up working with. So one of the cool things was Jenny Blake, who I mentioned a lot. So actually, she mentions this podcast story in her origin, in her book called Free Time. She flew me to Paris to run workshops with her. Like that is like the most insane thing. So she's been a guest on the show. Yeah. One of my guests, Adam, I wanted to know more about the Clifton Strengths Tool, and he's this certified coach over in the Midwest of the US. And after our conversation on the podcast, he said, hey, you and I should speak at the conference in Omaha next year. And I thought, this is like as if we got selected. So one of my first gigs is speaking in the Midwest of America through a guest connection. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I love that you remember these stories, because sometimes, I forget them. So let's go back. When you think right now of your podcasting journey, what are the moments that kind of stand out? Like you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened.
Yeah. Well, I think people think of, so for a lot of people let's take it from where I was at that moment in time. I was working internally. I just moved back from Broome in Western Australia to Brisbane. I really had no brand. I was working in a really great global organization, but I really wasn't getting opportunities. I felt like this sort of small fish. And what I've discovered with the podcasting, and anyone that's listening that works internally, a huge side benefit was that now my organization started to see me as someone else. So I got more gigs. I was emceeing big global conferences. I facilitated our global company's executive strategy day. And that would not have happened because of the podcast. So people think, it's about building your brand externally, but think of the impact internally. That was one huge thing. I think just the fact that by having a conversation that is so joyful, it just seems so easy. Like, it kind of seems like you're cheating because it's joyful, you're learning, like there is actually no downside to it. And again, just building a global audience, a lot of people come up to me and they are really surprised, like, how do you have all these gigs that are international? And it really just is built off the fact that through this piece, we can just talk to people, in any time zone.
Yeah.
The gig in Omaha was a big thing. Paris was a big thing. Yeah, I mean, it just continues.
Rochelle asked me, one of the most scariest things I've ever done in my life and still continue to do for whatever reason is We Are Podcast. And again, this year we had the conversation about whether I should do it or not. And just before the deposit was due, I had this whole moment of like, life is really good right now. I don't need to put this on my plate. And Rochelle said something really interesting to me. She's like, Rochelle's my wife, for everyone listening. All this fear you're feeling, like, just take it and put it in a little box and we'll discuss it after We Are Podcast. And and I found that insane. I find that that her telling me that was so helpful. But then she went a step further and she said, but just so that I'm clear, why did you start We Are Podcast? And, Rochelle, so this is not like a normal Rochelle question to ask. And I said, to be honest, when I started We Are Podcast, I was like, well, I found this secret that business owners need to know about. And I just wish everyone knew that they could use it. And hearing that story right now is like, oh my God, that's why I started We Are Podcast. It is so crazy to hear that story. I mean, what other things come to mind like that? Because I can't seem to get people to understand how good this medium is.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you a quote that really stands out for me that is related to the theme of what you're saying is David Whyte, the poet. He said, "That which you can plan is too small for you to live." And I think when anyone is like starting a podcast, they might be writing like, this is what I need to do. This is what I want to gain. You might have your list of what motivates you. But look, I didn't have on my list, be flown to Paris by my favorite author, speak at one of the best events in my industry straight off the bat, build my business off the back of this, run an online program. Like, none of that was on my list because I couldn't even be brave enough to anticipate or imagine that. So that's the beauty of podcasting, is it, and what Jenny Blake talks about. She uses the phrase serendipity popcorn. So it's an evergreen medium. You're having these conversations. In 6 months' time, someone might pick it up. Popcorn starts bursting in your inbox. An opportunity arises that you could not have planned or dreamed of. That's why podcasting, I think, is so powerful. You can't logically think, what will this create for me? Because it's actually going to exceed it. Well, in my instance, and I think in your instance as well, Ronsley.
I think, I'm continuously surprised. Oh, well, I don't think after all these years, and Facebook reminded me a few weeks ago that it's been 10 years doing this, which is, I just feel like I'm getting started. I feel like I'm the new guy to the block. I really feel like I'm still learning so much, even when I hear, people who've done it differently from when I started. Things are different, tools are different, strategies are different. And it's such a, I always feel like when I ask the question that I'd be surprised, that I won't be surprised. But whenever I ask the question, I'm always surprised at what podcasting has done for someone else and how it has opened doors that none of us could have predicted. And it continues to do that. And then sometimes I wonder if you go through the same thing like other podcasters and kind of go, I should just check my numbers, and then you look at the numbers and feel like it should be something else. Does that happen at all?
Yeah. I'm not a metrics person. I'm a really quite intuitive. People might see me, and I think people look at me from the outside and think organized, metric focused, goal oriented. I'm not, though, at all. Yes, I'll look at the podcast. What I'm really looking at is is it growing over time? But what I'm most delighted about is actually seeing the backlog of episodes that are downloaded. And I think that is just this 1 hour of conversation, and like future Leanne is grateful that I've had that, because it just keeps, again, generating more serendipity popcorn. I'm really not, initial podcast was extremely niche, first time facilitator. I did it for 200 episodes. The only metric that I really cared about is, am I still learning and growing? When it came to about episode 200, I felt my own energy start to wane a bit because I no longer identified with being a first-time facilitator. So knowing that was my most important metric, I had to sort of go, right, let's close this show, let's start something different that will give me more energy for these conversations. So for me, that is, that's the most important metric. And in terms of like the KPI and the ROI on the podcast, I just feel it's already it's again surpassed what I originally had imagined in terms of opportunity. And while like there's a few direct lines to had this conversation, got a gig, a lot of it is indirect, but it's just reinforcing trust, reinforcing relationships every episode that I release.
Yeah, you mentioned a few times the podcast, so let's get into the story of first of all, 200 episodes is a lot in terms of reps. Like, there's a very famous stat of 7 or less episodes being, the normal, let people buy out when it comes to the podcast because of the kind of work that's required. But let's talk first about the evolution. So you got to 200 episodes. What was that like? Did you feel before that you were changing? And then how did you go about making the next one? What was that process like?
I think it was episode 130 or 140. I actually interviewed a guy on the podcast, Alan Weiss, the $1 Million Consultant. And this was a podcast. And on that, he was just challenging me on my business model. So it felt like a coaching call. And I really woke up, actually. And I think as I was reflecting on that conversation, he's basically saying, look, you can't be a facilitator. You've got to be, be an expert and deliver your expertise through a variety of mediums. I was reflecting on that. I was resisting it a bit. And so over the course of about 60 episodes, what I was learning was that I was hearing things in the podcast, but there were patterns. I'd already kind of heard the same type of advice or insight. And I just thought, look, if I really want to reposition myself as something different or just separate myself from the facilitation tag, to say to clients that I can offer more, I had to sort of go. But I'll tell you what, the other unintended side benefit of having a podcast, particularly if you are in a role where you communicate, is just the skill set you develop. Like being able to listen, respond, and be comfortable in ambiguity, I think is really key.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Clubhouse was going to make it, but the best thing about Clubhouse and doing it for a year was being able to moderate more than one person at the time, because I had done so many one-on-one interviews. I had done, I think by the time I had 1,200 maybe under my belt, but then through Clubhouse, being able to moderate without seeing and having all these big names and being able to only speak in tweets almost because you have the talking stick. Only one person has the talking stick. So it's crazy how that skill set has just made me such a better presenter, better communicator, better way to think on the go as well. So I totally agree with that, especially when you're starting off. And to your point, if communication is in your wheelhouse, when you're thinking about stuff getting in the way, what is the stuff that gets in the way of you making the podcast? Does anything happen, or do you feel like it's effortless? I spoke to Jim and Jamie Shields a couple of hours ago, who again one day just decided like, hey Ronsley, I want to start a podcast because it's COVID, and they've like exploded, and they've just they don't know a lot of things that are happening, and it's kind of they've almost outsourced a lot of this stuff, and it's so cool to watch that they're so in this like artist mode, and they have nothing that gets in the way apparently, according to them, because they feel so empowered by it. But I wonder whether there's something that gets in the way. What's difficult in you making the podcast?
Yeah, I think in early days it was just like, how the heck do I do this thing? However, I feel if you've got a resourceful mindset and attitude to it, these are actually quite simple things to overcome. And Ronsley, I'm sure people talk to you about the tech all the time. And I just say to people, like, don't even worry. Like, that's the easy part. Tech is easy. It's all about, like, are you getting like your strategy? Are you getting the right guests on? Are you learning all that as well? So in the early days, now, this is a bad thing, but I actually enjoy editing. Like, for some reason, I get in a weird flow state when I edit things. And so it took up time, but I felt reluctant to offshoot that. But I have got to this, I mean, I think around episode 50, I was starting to outsource show notes, that type of work to people. And even with my new show now, I just record, I do the intro and post-production, and I wake up the following week, it's all done and delivered. So in terms of objections now, it's probably more about, I've kind of gone the other way. So I went from a really niche podcast to something that's extremely broad now, which unfortunately for a person like me, I kind of maybe need some constraints on myself. Otherwise it's like a topic around this and this, but I'm still enjoying it. So yeah. I don't really see that as a massive objection.
So let's talk about that. I mean, it's obviously taking up some mind space, right? So what are your thoughts? What's happened? What's the new show? Just tell us a bit about it, and what do you go through when you prepare for it and record for it?
Yeah, sure. So the new podcast is called Leanne Hughes Work and Live Large. And even as I say that, I'm like, it's not rolling over my tongue. So I'm thinking about a potential rebound in future. What goes through it is I think about who is someone I see out there that in my way of living large and working large, is doing that, is actually just taking action, having ideas, testing things out, and going all in. So I think about people, I think about books that I've read, people that I want to connect with, and that's my simple question of who would I want to speak to that actually will provide joy and that I'll learn from on the show that others can benefit from. And then it's just reaching out. I do that all myself because I think it's all about building that relationship. Often when I get authors, I will read the books, I'll take notes, I will research for authors, and then just record it and shoot it off to those folks that help me out with all the post-production.
So do you have like a procedure for them to follow? Is there certain guidelines that you give them on how you want the show to turn out? And then what do they do after the recording? Like what kind of repurposing is done, or what kind of content do you create from there?
Yeah, so for the first 5 episodes, I believe I set up like how I wanted it to be structured in terms of like the take a snippet, post it here, like just show them how I liked it to be done. Got them on board. So what they do, they produce, I get an audiogram, a videogram, a couple of quotes, the show notes, which of course I'll go in and just edit. Episode titles, I wish I could outsource that, but I'm very I think it's super critical to have a compelling title.
Yeah.
I'll actually throw it to them to brainstorm a few episode titles. That just then helps me figure out which one do I like or which one can I tweak, as opposed to starting from a blank slate. They timestamp it all. They get all the resources because I love sharing any tool that's required. And then we have a cool system through Airtable that does that.
Yeah, cool. So you use Airtable to organize your workflow, and there are a lot of spinning plates when you have a podcast. Like there's a lot of things that are moving. You're obviously a very relationship driven person. How do you maintain all the relationships over all the guests that you have? Is there a system to that?
I was actually talking to a friend on the phone about this yesterday. I was like, I do have so many relationships, and I pick up new friends every day. I don't have a CRM or anything like that. What I do is if I'm literally I go for lots of walks and runs, and just I like to think, and I'll hear something or see something that reminds me of that person, and in that instant, I will send that to them. It's incredible the amount of times that people respond and like, oh my gosh, Leanne, I was just thinking about you as well. I talked about intuition before. I'm not going to get all woo-woo here, but there's something about this idea, this person is hitting me right now. I'm going to reach out to them. Much like when, Ronsley, I reached out to you to be a guest on my show. Yeah. You were like, oh, I was just thinking about facilitation and how you identify as a facilitator as well. And it was just, the timing of that was so perfect. So there's no I don't have a CRM. I probably need to add more structure, but for me, it seems to be working right now. Just feeling it.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think feeling it is great. I just sometimes, we do things naturally. And we don't know whether it's useful for someone else. And you're right. I think people from the outside think that Leanne has a system for everything. At least I feel that, and maybe she doesn't. But I'm super curious on what do you have systems for? Like, what other systems that you have in play? Because obviously you do go running a lot. You do certain things that are like pretty on schedule. So what are your systems like?
Yeah. I so laugh at this public perception of me. It's just so, I don't know. I think it's because, I mean, like if you were to Ronsley come over right now and see my computer desktop, like I've got like 100 icons on this desktop, but I think I'm really good at managing ambiguity and chaos. And rather than having to force a system onto it, I'm actually okay with being structured within the chaos, which I think is actually a superpower. So, but you're right. So every morning I find that exercising will wake up my brain. So I see it not for the utility of like getting fit, but more about it will get my mind sharp. So I have to exercise, like at least sweat for an hour every morning.
Yeah.
That's like a not negotiable. I think I work pretty quickly. So the systems I spoke about Airtable. Just the night before, I'll just write down like, what am I thinking for tomorrow? At the same time, I also leave space in my calendar because when inspiration strikes, I want to take action on it straight away. The more that I leave it, the less the idea will be exciting for me. So I plan that. I think Sean D'Souza talks about chaos planning. I always plan some chaos into my day as well.
Yeah, I mean, those are systems, and those are pretty like interesting systems. That's what I'm saying, right? I think we don't give ourselves credit for the things. Oh, I not necessarily even credit. I think we find it difficult sometimes to explain the things that come naturally to us. I think that's what it is, because a lot of the times, and I've like even recently, I've been thinking about like why do all these people come when I say, hey, I'm doing this thing, like why do they I still find it absolutely insane that it happens, but I I think that it's just one of those things that I don't even know, and I find it really difficult to explain because I get asked it all the time, like how did you get to work with Vayner, like how did you get like with the actors and with the artists, like I don't know. I genuinely have I don't know what the and when people ask me, like I find it really uncomfortable to try to explain it because I have no system or no way to explain it. But the fact that it's happened so often, I think, means that there's something to it, and I wonder whether that realization has happened to you through the podcast in any way over the last few years.
Yeah, well, same as me, and I think it's so good to like. I always ask you that question, like, how the heck did you do this? Like, I'm so curious, and I've got your response always, like, I have no idea, and it's so charming. But even like I get told all the time, oh wow, you accelerate trust quickly. You're a super connector, and it's like this is just my natural way of being. And you think like I was even thinking, oh, should I create a course about it? But I'm like, I cannot teach this. This is actually just so innate to how I live and operate. I don't think I can teach it in terms of the way that I do it, because I'm trying to re-engineer the steps, and it's something about how you're showing up, and so I think I did get that insight a lot from the podcast. At the end of the conversation, guests were like, "Oh, I love your energy," and like just really saying really lovely things, and I started paying attention to that. So, I mean, I'll take it. I just don't know if I could share that. Is that how you feel as well? Like you just don't feel like you can teach someone else how you do it?
Well, it is so difficult, like even right now, for me to talk about it or explain it or bring it up. There's just like this resistance inside me to even kind of go. I feel like I think there's an underlying feeling that if I try to reverse engineer it, I'm going to remove the magic out of it. And I wonder whether that's the truth or whether that's just me not willing to go there. Right, I still don't know whether it's the first or the second, and chances are it's the second. It's a good chance that it's the second, that it's me not willing to go there because I'm not used to it. It's just not comfortable. I've never been there before, and if I'm there for too long, I'll feel extremely uncomfortable, and I just maybe don't want to be there. So I feel it's more that than it's the other one, because I have reverse engineered some of the really insane things, like, how to create a podcast that is so unique just to you. How can you create a podcast that always returns for your business, for example? like I didn't know those answers before, but if I was, because I was forced and pushed to like, you know what, I signed up for this thing, but you're not giving me a straight answer. So I'm like, oh, I've got to think about a better way to explain this. And as a result, I've come up with these frameworks and stuff like that. And I feel you've done a lot of the same, because I see your frameworks and your two by two, which you've come up with, which is amazing. Let's talk about that and how you came up with that idea.
Yeah, well, like I said before, my new podcast is actually quite generic, and I thought I need some constraints on myself. So I said, right, every second Tuesday, I'll do an episode where I solve a problem or a challenge, and I draw a 2 by 2 matrix to do that. So the challenge I solved recently was that I had someone ask me, like, hey, how do you, like, I'm listening to all this new stuff, but like, I'm not taking action on it. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I just mapped on a 2 by 2 on the y-axis, I put consumption. So the amount that you're consuming versus low consumption. And on the x-axis, I put creating, like what are you actually doing with the information that you're consuming? And then that's just basically it. So it's like a shorter episode. It's more YouTube first. So I draw it, talk it through. And the good thing about that is people can identify where they are on the quadrant and then what they might need to do to actually move to the quadrant they'd like to go to. So it's great. It's a great challenge for me because I don't usually think like that, but it forces a framework on all the crazy stuff going on in my mind.
It's funny you're saying that, because, you know, from the episodes, it doesn't seem like you don't think like that. And it's crazy that that framework allows you to think like that. And the reason I'm saying all these things is because of the way that this conversation has unfolded, as to like us not necessarily giving ourselves credit for the things we're good at, right? And this is coming from someone who's written a thesis on process quality, taken two companies to ISO 9001. These are software engineers who have been doing it in a certain way their whole life, and getting them to conform to a process, right, is so hard. And to your point earlier, it's about first figuring out what you currently do, and there's a process to that. And when you figure out that process, you can make small tweaks that will make a drastic change or a drastic difference to how you do it. For example, you have figured out that you hack your whole day by getting an hour of exercise in the morning. Now, a lot of people know that but might not do it, but you've kind of found it to be a non-negotiable, which has probably given you all the other things that come with your popcorn, serendipity popcorn that you talk about. Is because maybe that's that one critical repetition that probably snowballs through the rest of your day.
Yeah, I think so. But like, if I don't do it, you don't want to talk to me, Ronsley. I shouldn't be on any podcast if I don't do it because I literally feel like I'm contained. So it's just like a sanity saver. But you're right. I think because it's in that moment, in that 1 hour where it's like dreams come alive. It sounds super corny, but really interesting ideas come alive. Dreams, like I hear cool things. I'm observing a lot. It's the morning. I'm connected. Oh gosh, there's so much going on in that 1 hour that, yeah, it has to happen. But you're right. I never saw that as like my system or process. I just see it as, oh, this is just something I do. Yeah. So it's interesting how we don't think what we do is actually that interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy because, you know, I was having a conversation with Taki more, I don't know, maybe a few months ago, I think, probably last year. And in the course of that conversation, he was like, but you just make it a thing and you invite people to it. That's what you do. And it's just the way he said it that I realized that my whole life, you know, my whole life, I have been putting on these things and inviting people to it. And then it suddenly became, oh, that's my thing. But I never realized that until like 6 months ago, until someone kind of pointed it out and went, and now, like, I genuinely feel like this is my next thing, is like to start doing dinners again, like bringing people together, doing it in Brisbane, doing it in Sydney, doing it in, because I've done a few in the States, and it's like, oh my God, it's so amazing. And I feel like, see, even talking about it gives me so much joy, and I wonder why I haven't done it, you know, in a while. So I think there are things that gives us joy, which, you know, I love seeing your Nike Plus, you know, updates really on, like, because you get the Nike Plus update of how many Ks you've run. And I have to say, I have become a fitter person because you invited me to the 2020 in 2020, and you have these goals that you set for yourself. Where does that come from?
The 2021, that's a prime example of what I was saying before about if I wait too long, I'll lose the idea. That was just like, I think it was on the 30th of December, the day before, 2 days before the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
It was just something attractive about it. 20 Ks in 2020 is like, that's super, like when I hear that, there's some emotion in that. It's like, that's ambitious. It's not like I'll run every day for 30 minutes, which I think is just boring. I mean, I don't want to talk about the BHAG. We've all heard that acronym, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal, but it was something attractive about it. I think we could rally some people together for it. So without even doing the maths, like I was like, oh, okay, 5.5 Ks a day, every day. I was like, that's cool. But I didn't even think about this. If you miss a day, you've got to run 11K the next day. Like I didn't even know that was a thing. If I had even had some awareness on that, I probably wouldn't have started it. Yeah. But yeah, I think I got there by the following year.
Yeah.
30th of December, I made the 2020.
Oh,
and it was good to be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you did. So for me, I was on track, doing everything great until I was quarantined for 14 days. And those 14 days, just like to your point, just compounded. And I'm like, I can't see myself doing this. And it just went downhill from there. However, I got like 600 or 620 Ks in the year, which for me was great. And that snowballed a whole bunch of insane things. And now I compete competitively badminton and table tennis like every week. And again, it wouldn't have started if not for that fitness craze then, right? So it's just these snowball effect that these reps have, which we're not paying attention to, especially when it comes to business. Can you think about the reps that you do? And I, for sure, you must not think that it's planned, but it's probably not. But what are the reps that you do in your business to develop it and to grow it?
Yeah, well, I definitely think the back of conversations, like, so the back of my business is just having conversations. I think I got in a habit, same year in 2020 when I did the running, was like posting every day on LinkedIn. Now, serves two things. Obviously, one is you're getting your brand out there every day, but it forces me to think about what is actually interesting and relevant to post. And I don't schedule any of those posts. It purely is, what am I hearing? What am I observing? And I use that as a tool to then frame something up. Now, I don't post every day on LinkedIn now, but I still have that theme of like just paying attention to what's going on and how can this serve my content? How can it help with clients as well? And I'll note it down. This year, I'm really focusing on writing articles. So just getting a weekly article out, again, to refine my thinking. And as you know, Ronsley, like you write as well, but just writing helps really consolidate and clarify an argument that I'm forming. So for this year, that's my real rep, is like just writing articles and providing a unique kind of counterintuitive perspective on what's actually going on.
Fascinating. I want to ask you about the noticing bit. Like what does that process like? What happens? So you're consuming, this is like such a, holy shit, Leanne, you're amazing. Like when you think about, like when you see something, what goes through your mind when you kind of go, okay, I've noticed that, I'm going to capture it in some way, and then I'm going to break it down. What is that process like?
Yeah. Well, even, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was going for a dog walk and I was walking in this path, and there was this turkey there, and it actually started building its nest on the path. So and I started thinking about that. Like, what is this all about? I mean, yeah, so we have to walk around, but you think of, are there people, leaders in organizations, that are just building things in isolation and not considering their environment? Like thinking about that, right? So I just start thinking the implication, and honestly, for some reason, birds and animals really provoke the ideas in me as well. So that's the thought process, is like, oh, that's interesting. And I think even for half a second, if I'm seeing it and I think it drives some curiosity, then I think, what does this relate to in terms of helping out my clients or content? So that's it. And I just note it down in my phone at the time, because I usually forget, because my mind goes like this. And then I'll come back later, think of the connections. Yeah, it happens all the time. Even when I'm getting massages, I form these stories and ideas.
That's actually really cool. I mean, I wish that I was more organize, and this is something that I really do think about a lot, like to organize my stories and organize my anecdotes and organize the things that have happened so that I can better explain certain situations. And I haven't gotten there, even though there's so many notes that have been captured, like since the beginning of time, it feels like, for me. So I love that idea of noticing, being so curious that you don't know why it's happening, and then you kind of go, well, if this is happening here, how does that relate to my people? So is that what you're thinking about? You're thinking about your audience and what they're going through? Are you thinking about their problems or what situations they're dealing with? Is that how you make the connection?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how I make the connection, or it relates to what am I sensing online. So even an example is like early this year, right at the beginning of the year, I thought, right, I'm going to just schedule in haircuts and book them for the rest of the year. And I found that after haircut one, I just couldn't make any of the appointments. So while I tried to do all this planning and upfront, it just didn't work in practice. And so then I related that to company strategy and how they spend all this time planning things and have these quarterly check-ins and metrics. But there's so much going on that's going to impact that. So at a micro level, Leanne's story. And then I think the clients that I work with, what are their problems? And that it's super easy to connect a lot. Ronza, you spoke a bit before. I just want to highlight, the whole way I think about this was influenced by Matthew Dix and his book Storyworthy. So he calls it homework for life. He says that every day there's something that stands out for you, just write it down, capture it in a spreadsheet or wherever it is. And you find it's very easy then to sort of think about them and then relate it to where you want to go.
It's so cool. I do a daily journal, and there's it's a prompt. So I literally start, it's a thing, button, it generates the thing, and it's like 10 things you're grateful for, 3 intentions for the day, blah, blah, blah. And one of the ones that I've added to it recently is like, what conversations are you avoiding? And that has opened up such a good insight for me. I'm going to add that to my list because it's so quick and so easy to kind of like, what did you notice yesterday? Could be something so simple to be added to that list that will spark, a memory which might sort of be forgotten if not captured. Do you capture things? What do you capture?
Yeah, so that's what I'm not very good at using the spreadsheet. So what I'll do is, because it's like another tool you need to open. So with that turkey story, it's just like turkey nest on path, and then I'll just add in like a hashtag H for HFL, homework for life. So then when I search my notes, it's there. I should go to the next stage of categorizing it in a spreadsheet, but I just haven't got there. But I just know that if I search for that in my notes, I can see all these stories and they very quickly prompt, oh yeah, that could be related to this. Because the hard part is whenever you're having a conversation or you're creating a presentation, it's super hard to think of, oh, I need a story now that represents X. And you have to think of one. It's super hard. But if you can go through your list, you think, oh yeah, maybe this will connect and demonstrate this point. Yeah. So that's I just use notes. It's super simple. Easy to find.
Yeah. And you obviously remember quotes because in this conversation, you've said a few just off the top of your head and to the point. So you must capture them somehow.
I actually did a 2x2 on this because again, everyone's like, how do you remember these quotes? Yeah. So how I remember them is when I hear something that strikes me, I just use it immediately. I'll just weave it into something very quickly. So in a conversation, like a podcast or a coffee, or if I'm writing an email, I'll just use it. So I implement it straight away before I forget it. And then it just sticks. I don't know how it happens.
So ladies and gentlemen, you're watching this, whether it's live or it's later on, you've got to realize that we all have these processes and we all have these things that we do. And this actually gives me, and I have to say it's difficult because it gives me more impetus to go into my worthiness, into my owning it of my gifts, I suppose. And I feel like it's for all of us to do because, I was recently playing table tennis with a friend who had said to me that they were really good at table tennis, and they asked me how good I was, and I was like, yeah, I'm good. And I stressed about saying that I was good because I was like, oh, this is going to be this game, and then I'm not going to be good. And he replied going, you better be good, because I actually beat my neighbor like on 5 and he said he was good. And I was stressing. And then when we played, I like totally creamed him. But the point is, I did not even realize like all these things, that I was weighing myself down so much. And I wonder how much of that I was doing in business, how much of that I was doing just in general, by putting out the message of, very simply, like, get a podcast for your business, because it does has this ripple effect, and you need to know about it, because I mean, I don't want to sell. I mean, it's not about selling you anything, but if you just understand the concept and you understand how it does, like, and then I found myself in this game not playing, not playing to my full, like, because I was feeling bad for him. And then I realized that I do this a lot, where I dim my light because I want the other person to feel comfortable. Now, this is something that I've never actually set out before, and I'm gonna obviously capture, but it is such an interesting thing that I noticed because I do the athlete stuff. And I think, to your point, because you go for your runs and your walks, it has given you this other insight into business, and that's probably what's helped.
Wow, that's really insightful. Because we think, and this is the thing about when we talk about work and life, we just compartmentalize, but it's everything we do, our attitude towards one thing will most likely be similar to our attitude towards something else. Like it's not like I can be super efficient and goal oriented with this and not with the other thing. Like you take that mindset and attitude and way of working with you. Um, and so interesting insight for you in terms of dimming your light with table tennis. And then maybe that's how I operate in business. Very vulnerable for you to share that, Ronsley, and it's had me reflecting as well.
It's just given me the opportunity, and I think that's what podcasting does. It's more therapy than anything else, like how business for me is more personal development than anything else. I'm going to come back to you and ask you about your tips and tricks for a new podcaster getting into podcasting after all you've learned. But I'm going to talk about the mistake for a second that we make as business owner podcasters, and that is picking the wrong hosting platform. Now, this is number 69. I've made a list of a whole bunch of them that we make because we're business owners that are getting into podcasting, or we are podcasters that are getting into business. So we make a couple of mistakes that we don't even know we're making, and usually we can just fix them by, by reading it. And if you want a whole list, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com. You get the whole list. Today is number 69, picking the wrong hosting platform. If you have not caught a previous live, I did a live interview with Rob Walsh from Libsyn, and we were talking about the different components of a hosting platform. What does it give you? What kind of metrics does it give you? Is it always up and running? Does the servers ever crash? Is your podcast always available? So these are all the little things that sometimes when you're picking a podcast platform, you're not really sure. We kind of go for, if you're trying to choose between two different things, usually we go on a cheaper price if we don't know what to look for in terms of features. And I'm not saying not to go for a cheaper option. I'm just saying that look at all the components that are available. Like look at what you get as a result of being part of a certain platform. Now, I'm a huge proponent of Libsyn. I've used it since the beginning. All my clients are on it, and I suggest it to everyone primarily because they have been around for the longest, account for the most amount of downloads, and they kind of have been around for the longest time actually. So, but not to say that they are the best. I know that there are other platforms out there, but just do your research. Make sure you figure out the right media hosting platform for your podcast, because if it's not reliable, it's everything that you've put your hard-earned effort into. So make sure you've picked that. Leanne, what do you use to host your podcast? And I'm curious whether you've changed it for the next podcast.
Yeah, I actually use Buzzsprout, but I also use I've got a few, and I like Captivate. Like, oh, that looks. I really like what they've got going on with just the combination of private and public podcasting. But right now, I've got Buzzsprout for my public podcasts, and I use Hello Audio, and I've got the Powerhouse plan there. I've got like 30 private podcasts in that I've hosted for clients and for courses.
Yeah, that's such a. I mean, Dr. Lindsay is amazing. Padilla, she's started Hello Audio, and she's been on We Are Podcast a few times. But it's such a cool way to create private playlists, even. So it seems like you've done a lot of research on media hosts. What are your thoughts on all the different ones? Because you've obviously seen more. I'm very, lips in, blinders on sort of thing. So when you see Captivate and you see the other ones, what stands out for you?
I just like the user interface is quite good, but also the I mean, you can get Audiogram straight from Buzzsprout, which I don't really use anymore because I now have like a team doing that. It's just a joyful, simple platform to use. What I love is on the basic. I think it's the one up from basic on Buzzsprout is the dynamic content. So that is a game changer. If I'm launching a new program, I just do like a 10-second opening about call to action, and then that blasts it through all my back episodes. I think you can do it on Libsyn, but I think you've got to pay a bit more to do that. Whereas Buzzsprout and Hello Audio, you can do that on both.
Yeah, really, really insightful. Really insightful. So for someone listening here that sort of just started out, what are some of the things that you wish you had done earlier, or what kind of tips and tricks would you have for someone that is a new podcaster, or even someone that's veteran? Like maybe there are things that you're doing that we all need to know about. Thoughts?
Look, yeah, so many. I guess I think I won't confuse everyone, but number one thing was actually have a call to action to get people on your email list. Offer something very exciting. I've got so many podcasts in my back catalog that are how-to episodes, like with very specific points, like even checklist, like process-driven. Like there's so much I could have done, even shared transcripts of episodes to get people on my email list. And I didn't really. I mean, I'm still pretty slack in the whole lead magnet area. But I think the quicker you can convert people onto your email list and even just starting dialogue with them is good. I think I waited a bit too long to start my community on my imposter syndrome. I was like, who will join this? And I'm big excited for 50. I think I've got close to 2,000 people on there now.
Yeah.
Everything though, I knew I wanted to do it. I thought, I've got to wait for it. It's like, no, just do it now.
Yeah.
So that would be my, if anyone's hesitating, just go all in.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Leanne. Where can people find you if they're looking for your work, and where to connect with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn at Leanne Hughes, Instagram, Twitter, I'm at Leanne Hughes as well, and my website is leannehughes.com, where you can find podcasts, YouTube, all of that.
Cool. Thank you for doing this. I do appreciate everyone that comes on the show. I mean, I know it's like you've got a whole bunch of different things to do in your business, in your podcast, in your life, and giving me an hour, which I get to share your energy and your frequency, is such a gift. So I thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping on doing the reps, because you can tell that the reps have been put into place. So thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ronza. You're a champ, and I love your phrase, return on reps. It's been a joy chatting to you as always.